Okay, right there. So secretions, and I forgot my glasses, so I'm going to stand like this the whole time. When we look at secretions, we already talked about things that cause increased secretion. Now you have to look at the things that shut it off. And our number one thing that shuts it off, look at that guy. What do you know about somatostatin? It shuts everything off, right? It just wants to stop everything. So somatostatin's out to stop insulin release. Epinephrine, what's interesting about epinephrine is epinephrine can actually work with insulin, but it also competes with insulin. So what is epinephrine trying to do that's the opposite of what insulin is trying to do? Epinephrine is trying to do what with your blood sugars? Raise them. Why does epinephrine want to raise your blood sugar? For quick energy in the brain, right? So sending that sugar up to the brain and getting it there. And epinephrine, you know, goes hand in hand with norepinephrine. Both these are there out to get higher blood sugar and actually help you think quicker. Right? And then something else that shuts it off is a drop in blood glucose. What stimulated it revolving around blood glucose? What stimulated insulin's release revolving around blood glucose? A high. So high blood sugars turns on insulin, which makes sense that low blood sugars are going to turn them off. So think of the feedback loop again. Okay, in metabolic effects, so what it's doing to things like sugar. So insulin's effects on carbohydrates, we know it's what? Catabolic or anabolic? Is it trying to break apart sugars or store them? Store. So what is it? Anabolic or catabolic? Anabolic. It's trying to go through synthesis and store up the sugars. How much sugar can your brain store? None, right? So where are going to be the two primary places you store sugars? Muscle. Is the muscle willing to give it back? Nope. So the muscle, it's a one-way trip. The sugar goes in and the muscle is going to burn it for energy. So it goes in and stores in the muscle for later use when you're running or exercising or doing something else. What's the other storage site? The liver. Is the liver willing to give it back? Yep. And insulin, I told you this the very first day of these endocrine slides, and I talked about that whole huge pathway that revolves around insulin. And I showed you all of the cascading effect and all the second messengers and everything. And I told you, but you wouldn't have to remember that whole pathway. All you need to remember is that insulin never makes contact with glucose. Insulin comes out because of glucose, but it goes to a cell and looks for what? What is insulin looking for on a target cell? A receptor. As soon as it binds to the receptor, it turns on machinery. What do you know about the machinery on the inside? Is it made from scratch or is it already made with insulin? It's already made, right? Because this is a water-soluble substance. It's floating through, it binds to a receptor on the outside and flips on a switch that opens up a transporter. That transporter is going to pop up on the other side of the cell and it's going to try and suck in sugar. The name of that transporter is important. It's called a glucose transporter or a GLUT, G-L-U-T. There are actually several different types of GLUTs. Like for instance, there's one on the brain called GLUT1. I'm not going to make you remember the different numbers. But the way that they react is they're trying to open up a transporter. It's a little pump for sugar. You pop this thing in the surface of the cell and it starts sucking sugar in. When insulin binds to the cell, that's the last step for insulin. Insulin binds to the cell pulls the insulin inside and shreds insulin. So it can't be reused. So the only place in your body that releases insulin is what organ? Just the pancreas. You can't recycle it, you can't release it from anywhere else. It's always revolving around the pancreas. And then number 2, insulin's effects on fat. What do you know about insulin? Is it a catabolic or an anabolic hormone? It's anabolic, so what do you think it's going to do to fat? Break it apart or store it? Store it. Where's it going to store it at? Adipose tissue. Yep, so it converts sugars into fat. So if you ever look at candy on the side like licorice, I love that. Looking at licorice packages and it says, hey, fat-free candy or fat-free food. Who cares? There's so many sugar calories in there that it's going to be turned to fat anyway. Makes no difference. And number 3, insulin's effects on protein. What is insulin? Anabolic or catabolic? It's anabolic, so what's it going to do to proteins? It's going to be, what's it going to do to amino acids? It's going to store them as proteins. So it works with what other hormone that's trying to build muscle? What's the other hormone? Growth hormone, right. And then you can see kind of the pathways here. So glucose is absorbed from your GI tract when you eat a sugary meal. You pull it into the blood glucose reserves. So your metabolic pool is another name for this. And then that metabolic pool can do something with it. It can either put it into the cells to be burned as energy or it can store it for long-term use. If your blood sugars drop, you can also go through a hepatic transformation. What's hepatic referring to? The liver. So you can either go through one of two processes which are not the same. There's glycogenolysis, which means what? Glycogenolysis is breaking apart lysis of glycogen, the storage form of sugar. It's breaking a sugar down into another type of sugar, a simpler sugar. And then there's gluconeogenesis, which means what were you doing? You're making it from something that's not a sugar, like, for instance, amino acids. And you know one of the byproducts of that. What was it? Ketone bodies, yeah, so ketone bodies. All right, so how insulin works, you have a raise in blood sugar. So what do they call that? Hyperglycemia. Yep, so a raise in blood sugar, that's the primary controller. It goes down to the pancreas, to the beta cells. Do you remember what was released from the alpha cells? The alpha cells release not insulin, its mortal enemy, glucagon, right. So it releases glucagon. So the beta cells release insulin. When the insulin comes out, it goes to all the other cells, like the liver, it goes to the brain, it goes to heart muscle cells, and starts causing them to start putting sugar on the inside. So it's going to decrease your blood sugar. It's going to help you store fats, decreasing your blood fatty acids. Store amino acids as protein, decreasing your blood amino acids. It increases the protein synthesis and increases storage of all of your fuel forms. Another controller, when you eat. So when you eat a meal or you start thinking about a meal, a signal goes down to your pancreas and says, hey, there's going to be food coming. What is it about the food that your pancreas is concerned with? The sugar that's in it. So it's like a warning sign. You take food in, hormones come out, they tell the pancreas, release the insulin. You start thinking about food, you start releasing the insulin, expecting that sugar spike. We talked about this one, a spike in blood amino acids. Insulin comes out to try and store the amino acids. What other hormone did we already talk about that comes out to store those amino acids? And I just asked you like 30 seconds ago. Growth hormone. Yep, growth hormone helps you store those too. And then sympathetic stimulation will actually inhibit the pancreas. Sympathetic's more worried about you running for your life, not storing sugar. So what's the role of insulin? I guess it's the role of insulin is all except what? What does it not do? How about number 1? Does it make proteins? Sure does. You can cross that one out. How about number 2? Does it make triglycerides? What are triglycerides? They're the fats. So it stores as adipose, so you can cross that one out. How about increased plasma glucose? No. It does exactly the opposite. So what is glycogen? Storage form of sugars, right? Glucose. Okay. Diseases that revolve around insulin, type 1 diabetes and type 2. Type 1 they used to call child onset diabetes, but now because of type 2 starting to hit the younger population, they quit calling it that. So, lack of insulin secretion. What organ is broken here? The pancreas. What cells are broken? The beta cells. Yep, beta cells. So it's usually associated with autoimmune disease, which means what's going on? The body's attacking the pancreas. So it attacks those beta cells, destroys them, and then there's no more beta cells, so there's no more release of insulin. So what's that tell you about this person and insulin? What are they going to have to do for the rest of their life? They're going to have injections. They're insulin dependent. Type 2 actually has a lot of different causes and a lot of different symptoms that go on. So type 2 is basically any type of diabetes that's not because of lack of beta cells. Most type 2s are because of metabolism issues. Like people that have had a really bad diet for a long time, they haven't controlled their diet efficiently, and basically it's their body's way of saying, screw you back, right? So if you're not going to take care of me, I'm not going to take care of you. Now, I think I told you the story about my stepdad and how he was way overweight and had type 2 diabetes when he was put in the hospital for like 7 weeks because he was on such a restricted diet. When he walked out of the hospital, he walked out without type 2 diabetes. But what happened in that situation was that his cells that were receiving insulin, they were being so abused by high sugar diet and so much insulin affecting them that they said, I'm going to stop putting what on my surface? Receptors. They backed off. Do you remember the term I told you the first day of the endocrine system about what happens when a cell turns down its receptor number? Downregulation. Downregulation. It was also called Sensitizing, yeah. So the cells were desensitized. And then after all the bad junk that he was giving his body for a long time, like backing off the Twinkies and the Ho-Hos and the Oreos and all of that stuff, and put on a more strict diet, what happened to his cells went, we kind of missed the insulin. We're going to pop some more more receptors up on the cell, so it became more responsive to insulin again. Did his pancreas quit releasing insulin? Nope. His pancreas kept releasing insulin, so every time he ate sugar, boom, insulin spike. The problem was his cells were less receptive to it. So type 2 diabetes we used to call adult onset diabetes because it was primarily adults that have been abusing their body forever. But now it's becoming a younger generation problem, primarily because of having fast food places with high sugar and high fructose corn syrup and all that crap in the diet, that it spikes your sugar levels so fast it cranks out the insulin, and basically those cells are just getting burnt out on it. Okay, so consequences related to the effects of carbohydrate metabolism. If they're not receptive to insulin, they can't store the sugar. So they get hyperglycemia because they can't take the sugar out of their blood and put it into the cells. So regardless of the type of diabetes, when you eat a high sugary meal, whether you're type 1 diabetic, you can't release insulin, the sugar levels spike. They go up really quick. If you can release insulin but your cells aren't receptive, you eat a sugary meal, your sugar levels spike really quick. And then when the sugar levels go down, they get a big spike again because the hepatic output. What's hepatic mean? The liver. So the liver's thinking, holy crap, our sugar levels are going up and down. I'm going to try and just contribute to this, and just keeps feeding more sugar. Is that helping the situation? Nope. And unfortunately, by the way, when they don't have the ability to store sugar efficiently, what happens when they haven't eaten a meal for 5 hours? Do they have the sugar storage to release and bring their blood sugars back up? So no, then they get what as a result? Hypoglycemia, just the opposite. So a lot of times with people that are diabetic, if they skip dinner and then they go to sleep, the next morning when they wake up, they're what? Hyper or hypoglycemic? They're hypoglycemic. Because you depend on your liver, the storage sugars throughout the night after you've digested your food, you've absorbed it. In the morning, you're depending on the sugars from the liver, but the liver is exhausted. It has nothing left to give. So these people are going to hypoglycemia. If they're in hypoglycemia, they're going to start taking amino acids and turning them into sugars. But what's the negative outcome? Ketone bodies. So what situation are you going to have to worry about with those people in the morning when they haven't eaten? Ketone acidosis, right. So ketone acidosis, what physical appearance would you see with their breathing? So they're high acid. What's the respiratory system going to do for that? It's going to try and do what? Blow out CO2. So what's going to happen with their breathing? They're going to be breathing kind of heavy, like they were just exhausted. But what about their nervous activity? Excited? Anxious? Jittery? No, just the opposite. All that acidity does what to the neurons? Start shutting them down. So they're going to be lethargic, depressed looking. They're going to look like they're what? Drunk. Yeah. So make sure you're associating these kind of things back to what you learned in the past sections. Okay, so consequences related to fat metabolism. They start going through lipolysis instead. So the lipolysis is doing what to their fat stores? It's breaking them apart. But it's breaking them apart and sending it straight over to the liver, where the liver is going to start processing amino acids and fats to make gluconeogenesis. What is that? Brand new sugar. What's a bad side product of using anything but sugar to make sugars? More ketone bodies. Yeah. So you have to worry about that metabolic acidosis, which I just talked about. Right. And then the same thing with protein catabolism. So they break down what protein stores? Muscle. Yeah, so they start breaking down their muscle stores and they start turning that into sugars again. So they get muscle wasting issues. So you have to memorize that. Just kidding. This is just kind of a pathway that explains all of the different symptoms that are going on. So if you have insulin deficiency, you're going to see an increase in lipolysis because insulin stores fat. So if you don't have insulin, you're going to do the opposite, which is doing what to fat? Breaking it down. So you break down the fats, which is decreasing triglyceride synthesis too. You start turning those into sugars, which causes that ketone acidosis or metabolic acidosis. Same thing, you're not able to store sugars. Your hepatic output starts cranking up, so you start having higher blood sugars. So the high blood sugars, but not the high storage. And then when you have high blood sugars, sugar's a solute. What's going to happen to the water? What's happening? Think about this. Somebody actually mentioned this earlier today. If you have a high concentration of solutes and low concentration of water, what do you call that? What situation? Hypo, hyper, or isotonic situation in the blood? Hypertonic. What's happening to their cells? They're shrinking because what's happening to the water? It's moving into the blood, but the blood pressure doesn't want to go up, so what organ is going to try and regulate the water? The kidney. What's going to happen to their urine production as a result? They start urinating a lot, but they urinate sugar out with the water. Is that water diuresis or osmotic diuresis? Sugar and water. It's osmotic. The concentration of the urine is still consistent with normal urine. They're just urinating a lot, which is polyuria. And then because of that instability with water and sugar, they start getting polyphagia. What's phagia mean? Eating situation. So they start eating more to try and regulate things. They start trying to bring more water in. You ever woken up at night and you're actually thirsty, but you go straight for the fridge? So you're going looking for something that's a water source, but you're actually eating more nutrients. You can look at the rest of it. Okay, long-term complications. You have to worry about with people with diabetes, cardiovascular, and nervous system issues. Number one thing you want to think about is blood supply. All that extra sugar starts affecting the blood vessels. Where do you see most effect of blood vessels? Close to the heart or further away? Further away. Closer to what? The extremities, fingers and toes, right? And which ones are further away, fingers or toes? Toes. So the first signs are going to be in their feet typically. And one of the signs that you're going to look for is poor circulation. So you get poor circulation at the toes, which isn't nurturing those toes. What's going to happen to the toes eventually? They're going to starve. They're going to go into the starvation mode. They're going to start atrophying, and then they're going to start dying. The cells in the toes start dying. One of the first signs of that is that, how many people here have hair on their toes? The rest of you are liars, right? So we all have a little hair on our toes. Those cells are making hair because they're getting plenty of nutrients. If you deprive them of nutrients, what's the first thing that's going to stop happening? That hair is going to thin and it's going to drop off. So it's one of the beginning signs that they're not getting good circulation to the toes. So there's a reason to keep the hair on your toes, so that you know if you get diabetes and it's causing problems. So hairy toes is a cool thing. Everybody's doing it. You should get a pedicure that enhances the toe hair. Makes it stand out. Like camouflage, so it looks like you belong out in the forest. Anyway, so cardiovascular problems. Bad blood flow, bad circulation, and that's going to cause complications with the heart too. So cardiovascular issues. And just by having bad blood flow, it's going to affect the nervous system. So another property with the nervous system is you're turning your blood hypertonic. What's it going to do to your brain? Brain cells, right? It's going to start sucking the water out of the brain. It's going to start causing biochemical reactions that you don't want in the brain. So it causes cardiovascular and nervous issues. And then the outcomes, heart disease, stroke, kidney damage, blindness. And when you get into pathophysiology, we'll talk about things like why that causes stroke. Alcohol does the same kind of thing that increases the risk of stroke. Alcohol pickles your brain. When you pickle something, what happens to it? Get bigger or smaller? Smaller. If you want to test that, take a cucumber and put it in brine. What's it do? It turns into a little pickle, right? So the brain's the same way. If you're pickling it with alcohol or pickling it with sugars, it's going to shrink. And it's going to give less support for the blood vessels, which increases the risk of them doing what? Popping. Yeah, if you don't have support for the blood vessels, they have a bigger risk of popping. So an aneurysm and a rupture, which causes a stroke. Just giving you some foreshadowing for your pathophys. Okay, so which of the following primarily doesn't occur with uncontrolled type 1 diabetes?
Wait, does or doesn't?
Oh, what?
It says does.
Oh, sorry. Which of the following does occur with uncontrolled type 1 diabetes? So how about this one? Excess fat depositing around the face and the trunk. What disease was that? Cushing's, yep. How about excessive urination? Yes. Hypoglycemia is the further down the road problem. What's the prime effect that's going to be caused by diabetes? Hyper, right? So that high blood sugars. And then do they lose their appetite? Actually, no. They get that polyphagia. Yeah. So excess urination does occur with type 1 diabetes. Okay, insulin excess causes brain-starving hypoglycemia as a final result. So the brain's not able to pull in the sugars that it needs. How are they going to feel? Excited? Pumped up? No, we just talked about that. They're going to be lethargic. They're going to be kind of sleepy. They're going to look like they're drunk. And then this is an interesting one, insulin shock. So when somebody takes insulin, what's also in the insulin is something that's like statin. Why would you give them something like somatostatin at the same time you give them artificial insulin or external insulin? What are you doing? You're making sure that their pancreas doesn't release more. Because what if you gave them insulin and their pancreas started releasing insulin at the same time? What just happened? You put way too much insulin in their body. Now that insulin is going to start storing the sugar in their cells, what's going to happen to their blood sugar? It's going to plummet so low that they can't sustain life, so they actually go into shock. There was a guy in the early 80s, he married a really, really rich woman, and he wanted her dead. So she was diabetic, so he did this to her. He overdosed her on insulin, and she went into a coma, but she came back out, and he's like, damn it. So he tried it again. And I can never remember the guy's name. It was Von something or other. Baron Von something.
Wait, doesn't somatostatin stop your body from storing sugar also? If it stops everything.
It stops the other hormones from being released. It's trying to stop everything. Every time we've talked about this, it's stopping the hormones from doing something. So it's stopping the release of hormones like insulin, glucagon. When we talk about the brain, it's actually stopping the hormones that make you hungry. So it just went crazy stopping.
The insulin you're giving from working?
It's stopping you from releasing the insulin. But the insulin you're giving them still works on its own. Yeah. So it's inhibiting the release of new insulin. Okay. And then reactive hypoglycemia, so 9 non-diabetic reasons for low blood sugar. It's like a beta cell tumor. But what's a beta cell tumor most likely to do? Remember the first day I told you with hypo and hyper? Yeah. Typically hypo is because of a what? Something destructive. Cancer, where hyper is typically because of something that's rapidly reproducing, like tumors. Yep. So tumors have a tendency to rapidly reproduce these cells and make them overactive, which is doing what? Why are they getting hypoglycemia? Because they're making too much insulin. Yep. So it's not diabetes, but it looks like diabetes. All right, and then just the opposite, glucagon. And I think I already told you, I always think of that infomercial, if your glucose is gone, get glucagon. So if your blood sugar drops, glucagon comes out. So what must be the final effect of glucagon? To raise your blood sugar. So what organ do you think glucagon is going to go for right away? The liver. It goes to the liver and tells the liver start making more sugar and start releasing more sugar. So general function, increase the blood sugar. Right. So the big stars there, just the opposite of insulin. If you have a drop in blood sugar, it stimulates the release of glucagon. Glucagon is a peptide hormone. So what do you know? Does it work fast or slow? Works fast. Where does it work? Inside the cell or on the surface? On the surface. So it goes straight over and starts activating it. Can you store glucagon? Yes, you can. If it's a peptide protein, you can store it inside of a cell. Right, so decreased blood sugar, a decrease in amino acids because of acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, when acetylcholine comes out, it stimulates the release of insulin and glucagon simultaneously. Acetylcholine is kind of like a parent that doesn't favor either child. If you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system and you're trying to stimulate digestion, you start releasing both of these so that they both come out and they're competing evenly. Insulin is just a little bit more powerful. And then norepinephrine and epinephrine. What do these two things do to insulin? What do these two things do to insulin? Epinephrine and norepinephrine, do they want to turn on insulin release or turn off insulin release? They want to turn off insulin release, so they're going to be best buddies with glucagon. What are they going to do for glucagon? It's going to turn it up. Yep. Why does norepinephrine and epinephrine want to turn up glucagon? To make glucose more available, right? It wants to boost glucose in the blood so you have more glucose available for the brain. And inhibitors, if you have too many fatty acids, glucagon's like, you know what, I don't need to come out and work because you got all these fatty acids floating around. Just go ahead and turn them into sugars. Is that a good thing, though? Nope, because you're also going to start making what's ketone bodies. And then somatostatin, what do you already know about that? Yep, it's going to inhibit the release of glucagon and insulin. And then insulin, what's it doing to glucagon? It's trying to shut it off. Yeah, it's trying to shut it off so that it doesn't have to compete directly. So here are your inhibitors and you knew your stimulators. And you already know the metabolic effects. If insulin was anabolic, what would you expect glucagon to be? Catabolic. So what's it going to do to your carbohydrate metabolism? Store sugar or break sugar? Breaks it and releases it into the blood. How about its effects on fat? Is it going to start storing your fat? It's releasing it. It's breaking it down and releasing it into the blood. And then its effect on proteins? Break them down. Yep. Catabolic effects. It breaks down your proteins so that you have amino acids to make new sugar from. So all three catabolic. They're all against storing. They're all about releasing it into the blood. So if you put the two flowcharts next to each other, you can see if you raise your blood glucose, what insulin... Good job! So what hormone would come out of raised blood sugar? Of course, it's insulin. So the high blood sugar is going to stimulate the beta cells, release insulin, and that's going to bring your blood sugar back down. At the same time, it's inhibiting the glucagon. Right? But then once the blood sugars are too low, what's going to happen? You have low blood sugar. It inhibits the insulin release and stimulates the glucagon release. So glucagon brings up your blood sugar, bring you back into balance. It's like a teeter-totter. What's that process of keeping that balance in the body? Homeostasis. And it's not perfect. It's not always just perfectly balanced. It's always teeter-tottering back and forth a little bit. One gets a little bit overpowerful and the other one has to come out to neutralize it. So what's true about glucagon? How about number 4? Promotes fat synthesis. What's the word synthesis mean? Catabolic or anabolic? Anabolic, you know it's not glucagon. So cross that one out. Number 3, converts glucose to form glycogen. What would that be? Catabolic or anabolic? Anabolic. So that's not it either. How about made in the beta cells of the pancreas? What's made in the beta cells then? Insulin. So where is glucagon made? The alpha cells. And then we know that raising your blood sugar is the right answer. Okay, glucagon excess can aggravate the hyperglycemia of diabetes mellitus because what's it doing? It's trying to release even more sugars. So it's going to work with the liver, and when we talk about hepatic oversecretion of sugars, glucagon is going to contribute to that. And there's that insulin somatostatin. Somatostatin stopping the glucagon is trying to stop the insulin that your body's making so that only the artificial or extra extra body, what word am I looking for? External forms of insulin can actually affect you. And somatostatin, automatically you already know it. It hates everything else. It stops it all. So its structure and synthesis, also a protein peptide. So it starts as a big molecule, shrunk to a little molecule, and then finally releases in active form. Where is it released from? What organ? Liver, what cells? Or liver, duh. Pancreas, what cells? The D cells, yep. Alpha for glucagon, beta for insulin, D, the delta cells for somatostatin. What was the last one? What letter? F, or also the PP cells for pancreatic polypeptides that suppress appetite. Okay. And then we've talked about this 3 times now. What stimulates it? Increase in blood glucose, increase in plasma glucagon, too many amino acids, too many fatty acids, and GI hormones. Didn't this happen about the same time on Tuesday? It must be the train schedule. I need to watch it a little bit closer. Okay, so the inhibitors, insulin. But what does somatostatin do to insulin? Tries to stop it. So they compete against each other, trying to stop each other. Right, so what do you know is true about somatostatin? Does it increase digestive organ motility and secretion? That sounds way too exciting, right? Cross that out. Is it made in the alpha cells? Nope. What's made in the alpha cells? Glucagon. Is it made in the hypothalamus? Yes, it is. Remember we talked about it before. It's made in the hypothalamus. Don't just stick with this one. Remember we've talked about this hormone before. So hormones we've talked about in the past, like angiotensin, aldosterone, ADH, vasopressin, we're going to keep talking about those over and over again. You have to remember them because they're all part of the endocrine system. And then number 4, insulin stimulates its release or secretion. What do you already know about this? No. So if you couldn't remember it was made in the hypothalamus, when you see that number 4, you know you can cross that one out. So this had to be the true one. Okay, next, endocrine control of calcium metabolism. So this is one that absolutely doesn't have anything to do with the hypothalamus. This is all about the thyroid and the parathyroid. So the 3 hormones we're going to focus on, there's parathyroid and calcitonin, which are made in the thyroid and the parathyroid. You can pick which one you think matches up to the parathyroid. And then vitamin D, which you know is made from where? Made where? Skin. Where's it activated at first? The liver. Where's it activated at last? The kidney. Yep. 3-step process. When you look at calcium, you want to look at phosphate too. Calcium and phosphate is just like sodium and potassium. When one moves one way, what happens to the other? Moves the other. Yep. So when I start increasing my blood calcium, what do you know is going to happen to my blood phosphates? They go down. If my blood phosphates go up, what's going to happen to my blood calcium? It has to go down. You don't want these two things at the same place at the same time except on the bone. Because when they merge together and they stick, they actually form bone. So do you want a lot of this stuff in your kidney? No, because they'll start doing what? Kidney stones. They start sticking together and helping contribute to kidney stones. So watch these 2 primary players in regulating. This guy actually has more of a contribution on the intestines and pulling calcium in. So these 2, parathyroid and calcitonin, are going to be just like glucagon and insulin, where they directly oppose each other. All right, so why you need calcium? You need calcium. We talked about it back in the nervous system. Calcium is responsible for allowing what to be released from a neuron? Uh-oh. I know, that was, wow, that was like 11 weeks ago. Not the action potential. It's when the action potential gets to the end of the axon, where's it at now? It's at the terminal bulb. It allows neurotransmitters to be released. Right, so calcium allows neurotransmitters to be released from the neuron. If you don't have proper levels of calcium, you get decreased neural activity. What about calcium in the muscle? What's it there for? Contractility. It allows contractility. So look at the neural activity and the muscular activity. If you don't have proper levels of calcium, you get decreased neuromuscular activity. The neurons don't want to fire properly, and the muscle doesn't want to fire properly. What muscle are you most concerned about not firing properly? Heart muscle, right? So an imbalance in calcium you want to worry about right away, causing things like heart arrhythmias. Okay, so if you get a decreased plasma calcium, you actually get a boost of muscle activity. This is weird. You just have to remember it that way. If you get decreased plasma calcium, you actually increase your muscle activity. You get jittery muscles. Why? Because think of concentration differences. If you have a lot of stored up calcium inside the cell and you don't have very much outside the cell, that stuff inside the cell, where's it stored at in the cell? In the sarcoplasmic reticulum. If you have imbalances, think of diffusion. If I have very little outside and I have a lot in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, as soon as I open one little doorway, what's going to happen? Flood, right? That's the simplest way to think of it. You get this massive flood inside the cell from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. What's it going to do to that muscle? Contract it firmly and very excitedly. So a little tiny bit of a muscle activity is going to be exaggerated, and you get this overexcitability. It's kind of a complex explanation when you go into the details of it, but if you think diffusion, it kind of answers it for you. And then increased plasma calcium actually decreases muscle activity. Right, number 2, excitation, contraction, coupling. Already talked about that. Excitation contraction coupling is actually inside the muscle where you bind calcium to what in a skeletal muscle? How quickly they forget. Troponin. How about inside of a smooth muscle? What? Oh, calmodulin.
She said cow.
You want to know what she said? She goes, cal, and then blah, blah, blah. Like I was going to answer it. I think you guys have learned that you've primed me. As soon as you start getting the beginning of the word out, I'll finish it for you usually. But yeah, nice try. I actually listened that time, sucker. Okay, so excitation, contraction, coupling. In a smooth muscle, remember it's binding to that calmodulin. How about in cardiac muscle? Binding to, it's got to be one of the other two that you mentioned. Is it going to be troponin or is it going to be calmodulin? Troponin, yep. So it's like skeletal muscle in that situation. And then stimulus secretion coupling. This is what we were talking about with the neurotransmitters. You get a stimulus and you secrete a neurotransmitter. And number 4, maintenance of tight junctions between the cells. You have these little things that are basically like concrete that hold your cells together. You need calcium. Without it, they don't attach very well. So think about times when you're trying to repair skin. How well are you going to heal the skin if you have an imbalance in calcium? If you can't make skin cells stick together? Is that important? Hell yeah. You want to be able to pull on your skin and not rip it, right? So having calcium imbalances is going to prevent you from healing properly, including clotting blood properly. So calcium, when we looked at that pathway of how blood clots, and I told you don't have to remember all 13 of these steps, calcium was one of those steps. So if you remove one step from that 13-step process, what happens to your ability to clot blood? Decreases. So not having the proper amount of calcium in your blood is going to prevent you from clotting blood properly. Okay, so regulation. The calcium status of the body, 99% of calcium in your body is where? Take a guess. In the bones. 0.9% of the calcium in the body, so less than 1%, is inside your cells. It's intracellular. That last 0.1%, a tenth of 1% of all the calcium in your body is in the extracellular fluid, like the plasma. And that little tiny 0.1% is extremely tightly regulated. Because you get it a little bit high or a little bit low, you see the problems. You have problems clotting blood, you have problems releasing neurotransmitters, you have problems with heart excitability and muscle contractility. So it's one of the minerals that's the closest or most tightly regulated chemicals in your body, minerals in your body. So the 2 main hormones that control it, parathyroid hormone, take a guess at where it's released? Cha-ching. Yep, so it's released from the parathyroid gland. Where's the parathyroid? Right at the back 4 points of the thyroid gland. Yep. And this is absolutely, positively essential for life. What you want to absolutely, positively remember about parathyroid hormone is that it's released when your blood calcium gets low. So if your blood calcium starts dropping down, parathyroid comes out. Where's the first place it's going to go to get calcium? Yep, you go straight for wherever the storage is at. So you go straight to the bones. What's going to do to your bones? It's going to thin them down. It's going to start breaking down the calcium in your bones and pushing it into the blood, doing what to your blood calcium? Raising it. Yep. Parathyroid is absolutely essential for life. Parathyroid hormone, PTH. And it's because of low, yeah.
My dad had one removed.
One?
He had one of those removed.
Does he have any issues with parathyroid hormone? He shouldn't, but...
I don't know, they just said, there's 4 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Took one out. So if they're essential for life, then,
He still had 3, right?
yeah.
It's like having an adrenal gland removed. Are you going to live?
Yeah.
You have an extra one. Or having a kidney removed. As long as you still have the other ones, you're probably going to be able to make it. Some people don't, though. Some people, if they have a couple removed, then the other 2 can't keep up, and so they still have to take supplements. Is he on drugs because of it, or is he fine now?
A lot of different stuff. I don't really know.
Oh. And you never know. Those a lot of different things may have actually caused the problem,
Right.
which sucks about getting old. If you can avoid it, do that. Yeah.
Get old.
Yeah. I'm going to live forever or die trying. Think about that a second. I heard the late laugh. That was good. Oh, yeah. That makes sense. It's funny. He's funny once in a while. Okay. So bones constantly remodeling. We call it dynamic because it's constantly changing. The bones you had when you were a teenager are not the same bones you have now. Your bones never stop changing. They're always breaking down in places and rebuilding in other places. What's kind of cool about the bones is the bones never scar either. So if you break a bone, as long as you don't shatter it and rearrange it in a really weird place, if you break a bone and put it back together, it'll heal itself nice and clean. It'll have a little bump for a short time, but that bump smooths out. It's like your body slowly sands and polishes the bone so it looks nice and new again. It's amazing how the bone repairs itself. But you have bone deposition and bone resorption. Bone deposition means you're depositing onto the bones. Bone resorption means you're reabsorbing it back into the... Every time you see reabsorption, you think into the blood. Exactly. Parathyroid hormone contributes to which of these? Bone deposition or bone reabsorption? Reabsorption. It's trying to break the bone down and pull the calcium back into the blood. The cells to get familiar with are the osteoblasts, the osteocytes, and the osteoclasts. You learned about these in anatomy, but now we're back there. So you start with these osteoprogenitor cells. I don't know if I have a slide on the next one. I thought I had a better slide. But you start with these osteoprogenitor cells, which are basically bone stem cells. And then they start maturing. And when they start making a bone, what do you call a maker cell? There's a special name that you put on it. Cyte is mature cell. Blast. So if you have an osteoblast, what's it telling you? It's making bone. What if you have a chondroblast? Nice try. What's chondro mean? It makes cartilage. What about a fibroblast? Makes fibers. Yeah, like collagen. So when you see the word blast, you always want to think that's a maker. So what do you think PTH is going to do to your osteoblasts? Slow them down. It slows them down. Right? An osteocyte, after you've matured this osteoblast, so it's making bone, it's building bone. When I teach anatomy, I always try and tell people, think about this as being a little bricklayer. He's building his own house, and as he's laying all the bricks around his house, he's trapped himself in. Can he make any more house after he's surrounded himself with house? Nope, but what can he do for his house? Just keep it clean, right? That's all an osteocyte does. So an osteoblast makes the house, this bone around it, and then once it's matured, it's stuck inside the bone and just keeps it clean. The other opposing cell, all of these come from the same pathway, osteoblasts and osteocytes. They all start from those bone stem cells. These osteoclasts, they come from things called monocytes. What do monocytes usually turn into? A macrophage, which does what? Eats and destroys things, right? So what do you know an osteoclast is going to do? Break down bone. What's PTH going to do to an osteoclast? Stimulate it. It's like throwing minnows around a shark, right? It's going to get the shark excited, so it's going to start destroying things. When these osteoclasts are exposed to the PTH, they start breaking down bone. These osteoclasts are kind of crazy, and I should put a picture in. When you see pictures of them, I swear they look like scrubbing bubbles. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Where you got the little bubbles with the ruffled edge on the bottom. And what they do is they just go along and eat the bone. They're just digging away at the bone. So if you expose them to PTH, you start digging away at the surface of your bone. If you had a tumor that released way too much PTH, what would you have to worry about? Right, weak bones, like osteoporosis. Because you're slowing down the osteoblasts, which they're not building the bone as fast, and you're increasing the activity of the osteoclast. Okay? And then, actually, in your notes, you can skip over to this one real quick, and we'll go back to the one before. But osteoprotegerin ligand, this stimulates osteoclasts. So what is the name of the chemical that stimulates osteoprotegerin ligand? PTH, exactly. So PTH stimulates this osteoprotegerin ligand. The next chemical that we're going to talk about, osteoprotegerin, is stimulated by something called calcitonin. So PTH stimulates this one, calcitonin stimulates this one. If calcitonin stimulates this, it has a chemical that binds to this osteoprotegerin ligand and makes it inactive. What did this chemical just become? Permissive, synergistic, or antagonistic? It's an antagonist. So what would happen to somebody that didn't have this chemical? If their body didn't have this chemical, osteoprotegerin ligand would keep turning up bone destruction. What would happen to them? They would have weak bones like osteoporosis. Yep. So now back to the last one. Osteoporosis, of course, that's the bone disease where the bones get too weak. So what happens is you have bone density tests, and when your bone density is nice and high, like 800, we call it 800, the density. I can't remember the measurement for density right now. I'm having a brain fart. I hate that. But when you have high bone density, it's a good thing. As you age, though, your bone density gets lower and lower and lower, which means it's not as strong and as thick. And when it gets down below 625, they call it osteoporosis, and you don't have to remember the numbers. It's just if you ever go in for a bone test, which I'm terrified for. I'm getting to that age. Do men's bones break down like women's?
No.
Yes, we do. But the benefit to us is because we're men, when we have testosterone in our system, what does testosterone do for us? It makes our bones thicker than a woman's bones. So our bones break down at about the same rate after we hit our 30s and 40s and everything. But the problem with women is that they started with what? They started with less bone. So, yeah, they started with less bone.
Really starts at 30.
There's this theory, we have a death gene is what they call it, that around 30 this thing turns on, it starts shutting everything down slowly. Yep. So testosterone levels start dropping, estrogen levels start dropping, your bone density starts dropping, everything starts dropping around 30. So, half the class goes, "Gah." Yeah. I think my death gene alarm clock just went off. But yeah, it starts turning on then. You start looking like you age faster and everything. And when you go on I feel like I'm plugging pathophysiology a lot today, but when you go on to that and you start learning about things like cancer and all that, we talk a ton about like what happens inside the cell with your DNA around the age of 30. Yep, it's a fun experience. Okay, so regulation, of course you have those two hormones, and I just talked about the two, but when you look at calcitonin and parathyroid's the key one. Calcitonin has less of effect. You could actually live without calcitonin, but you need parathyroid hormone. You have to. Because if your blood calcium levels drop, it's life-threatening. So if blood calcium levels drop and it releases parathyroid, what stimulates the release of calcitonin? If they're mortal enemies, and parathyroid is released when you have low blood calcium, calcitonin must be released when you have high blood calcium. Calcitonin, when I was remembering that, I always thought calcitonin, it sounds like it tones something, right? What is calcitonin toning? Toning your bones, right? When you tone muscle, you get big and strong muscles. So when you tone the bones, you must have big and strong bones. What do you have to have for big and strong bones? Calcium. You have to have calcium if you remember the milk commercials. I'm drinking milk so I'm going to grow big and strong. God, I hope you people can remember that. That would make me really old. But, so, a raise in blood calcium. You don't remember those commercials?
No, I do.
Okay. Damn, Barb, you about killed me right there. So, the calcitonin levels, they stimulate the C cells in the thyroid, not the parathyroid. They stimulate those C cells in the thyroid and they release calcitonin. The calcitonin comes out and it takes the calcium from your blood and sticks it on your bones. So what does it do to your blood calcium levels? It drops them. Yep. So if the initial effect is because you have high blood calcium with calcitonin, the final effect has to be lowering the blood calcium. So that's the primary effect, is to stick it to the bones. It does other things like helps you put it into the feces to get rid of it, because if you have high blood calcium, it can be lethal too. So it can help you excrete it through the urine, through the feces to get rid of it. But when you're looking at parathyroid is trying to bring it into the blood. So the first place it goes is to the bones. Where else can it go? It can go to your kidney and help you do what? Secrete, reabsorb, or filter. If you're trying to get something into your blood, filter, secrete, or reabsorb. You're trying to reabsorb calcium from your urine. So parathyroid can go there. It can go to the feces and help you pull calcium out of the feces. Remember we talked about the digestive tract. Do you absorb all of the calcium you eat normally? Nope. It's regulated by parathyroid hormone and what other vitamin/hormone?
Oh, vitamin D.
Vitamin D. So I'm giving you the main points, but you have to think of, there are other ways to get the stuff into your body or get it into your blood. The storage form is in the bone, but you can pull it in from your digestive tract. You can pull it back in from the kidneys and help raise the calcium. And just the opposite is true. If you have too much, stick it to the bone, dump it into the feces, dump it into the urine. All right, and I've already talked all the functions. But in your book and in your flow chart, you can see what happens with the calcium levels. So if you have a drop in calcium, what hormone should you think of? Drop in calcium, parathyroid comes out. So PTH comes out. I already told you these different sites. It goes to the bone and does what to your bone?
Takes calcium from it.
Yep, it pulls calcium off the bone and dumps it into the blood. It comes along to the kidneys and it helps you activate vitamin D. It also helps you reabsorb calcium. So remember, the kidneys are activating vitamin D. Vitamin D goes to the intestines and helps you do what with calcium? Absorb it. Yeah. All three of those pathways are helping you raise your blood calcium. So just knowing these pathways, if you had a raise in plasma calcium, what hormone is it going to stimulate? Calcitonin. Where does it come from? What gland? The thyroid. It comes from those C cells in the thyroid gland. What's it going to do to the kidneys? What about reabsorption? Decrease the reabsorption. What's it going to do to your bones? Deposit it. Yep. What's it going to do to your intestines? Increase reabsorption, or increase absorption, or increase secretion? Secretion. Get the calcium out of your body, and cause the final effect of lowering the blood calcium back to normal. Okay, so which is not a function of PTH? I read that right? So how about number 1? Cause bone reabsorption or breakdown? Does it cause you to reabsorb or break down bone? PTH. Why did PTH come out in the first place? Low blood calcium, so what are you doing to the bone? Breaking it down. So you can cross out number 1 because that's definitely something it does. How about number 2? Cause reabsorption of calcium from the urine and loss of phosphate. Does it cause reabsorption of calcium? What's it trying to do to your blood calcium levels? Raise it, so it's reabsorbing. Does that make sense that if you're reabsorbing calcium, you lose phosphate? Absolutely. Remember, anytime that you see calcium go up, you want to see phosphate go down, because if they get together in the kidney, what's going to happen? Kidney stones. Yep. If they get together in the blood, you might see plaque starting to develop on the walls of the arteries. You don't want that. And then how about number 3? Does PTH activate vitamin D? What's vitamin D trying to do? It's trying to pull calcium into your blood. Does that sound like something PTH would want to do? Yes, they work together, so you know it activates vitamin D. So obviously number 4, it makes you want to eat ice cream. Nice try. No. Yeah. Your body's going, eat some ice cream, eat some ice cream.
Wait, though, if calcium is the opposite of phosphate, then how do they get together to build bone?
When they both come by, when they're coming by the osteoblast, you want to think of the osteoblast going, I need concrete and I need water to make bone, right? So we'll say that the concrete's the calcium and the water would be like the phosphate. As it's coming by, they grab one of each. It's not that you have 0 phosphate in your blood when you have high calcium. It's always a higher level of one or lower level of the other. So the osteoblast will grab what they need, pull them out, and then stick them on the bone. They're actively sticking them together. Okay, and then vitamin D, the last one. I think that's the last one, isn't it, in your notes? So activation of vitamin D, actually I'm just going to flip to the flow chart. So you already know, where's it made? In the skin, when you're exposed to sun. And I love how the tanning bed companies have really been promoting over the last year or so how good tanning is inside their tanning beds. Tanning is good to an extent of being outside for 15 minutes a day, which always made me wonder, how much of your skin do you have to have exposed for 15 minutes a day? Do I have to walk out naked in my backyard for 15 minutes? Or can I walk out and just shine my hands or put my hands up towards the sun? Is that good enough? I still don't know. So I just walk outside naked 15 minutes a day just in case. That's why I have a privacy fence, right? I'm kidding. Just kidding. Just in case. All right. So anyway, sunlight activates the vitamin D, or activates it, stimulates production of vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 is a hormone. How does it travel? Through the blood. So it goes sliding through the blood, and then when it gets to the liver, you have enzymes in the liver that grab this vitamin D3, and they have basically this enzyme that starts cramming it together with a hydroxyl group, that OH, which is a base, and goes crunches them together. Now you have this modified version, and you don't have to remember all the names. You just have to remember where it's working. Skin to the liver, and then once it's released from the liver, it's still not active. It's not doing anything. So they should actually just drop an O-gen at the end of that, right? So as it's sliding through the blood, then it's going to go down to the kidney, and the kidney's waiting. The kidney's not going to do anything until it has permission from what other chemical? Parathyroid hormone. So what happens is if you don't have the parathyroid hormone, the kidney will actually let it either slide into the urine or let it stay in the blood temporarily as an inactive form. But if you have PTH, the PTH is going to convert that last step, and it's going to make it into vitamin D, crank it into the blood, and where's that vitamin D want to go? It's going to go somewhere to help you absorb calcium. Where do you get calcium from? The digestive tract. So it's going to go over to the GI tract, and it's going to help you promote reabsorption. I don't know why I said re. It's going to help you promote absorption into the blood. Okay, so which is true about vitamin D? Vitamin D is required for iron absorption. True or false? What makes this false? What should it be? It should be calcium, right? How about number 2? Vitamin D is activated by PTH in the liver. True or false? Why is it false? It's the kidney. How about number 3? Vitamin D is made in the skin in an inactive form on exposure to UV light. That's true, right? You want to watch here. It's made in inactive form. If this said active, not so true. And then this last one, is vitamin D a water-soluble hormone? No. You learned this in the GI tract. What were the 4 fat-loving hormones? A, D, E, and K. Yep. So don't forget, vitamin D's name is vitamin, but it's actually a hormone. So we know number 3 was the right answer. And we already talked about calcitonin. But calcitonin made in the C cells of the thyroid gland. It's released when what situation is going on in your blood. When you have high blood calcium, right. What's it do? Sticks the calcium to bone. What's it do with the GI tract? Excretes calcium into the feces. What's it do with the kidney? Blocks the reabsorption, right. So it's blocking reabsorption of calcium. It's trying to get you to get rid of calcium. Your calcium's too high. And then you already saw this slide. I already talked about it earlier. And then I already pointed this out. Right at the very beginning I told you, if phosphate goes up, what happens to calcium? It goes down. If calcium goes down, what happens to phosphate? It goes up. So if you just take the same PTH, if PTH is doing what to calcium in the blood? Raising calcium in the blood, what's it doing to the phosphate in the blood? It's decreasing it. If calcitonin is lowering the calcium in the blood, it's doing what to phosphate? Raising the phosphate in the blood. Always inverse. And then we already saw this one too. Right. So last slide, I think. Yep, last slide. Calcium disorders. So hyperparathyroidism. Without even reading this, hyperparathyroid, what's happening? Too much PTH. What do you know PTH does? It breaks down bone and raises your blood calcium. What's going to be a problem with these people?
Osteoporosis, kidney stone.
They could have osteoporosis symptoms, exactly. Kidney stone symptoms because they're putting way too much calcium in there. What else? Hypercalcemia causes the muscle weakness. Remember, that was the tricky one. If you have low blood calcium, then it causes like that excitability. But instead you have, I don't know why I did the thing. I couldn't think of excitability like that paralysis bit, but that was my best paralysis imitation. I suck at Pictionary and gestures. Right? And it causes neurological disorders and thinning of bones and, of course, kidney stones. So hypoparathyroidism, is it life-threatening? Yes. You need the right amounts of PTH. So if you don't have enough PTH, what's going to happen to your blood calcium? It's going to go down, down, down. So you increase the neuromuscular excitability. That's where the paralysis comes on. Spasms. Whoa, what skeletal muscles are you freaking out about spasming?
Heart.
Skeletal? Right. Right. The breathing muscles, diaphragm and intercostals, right. Yep. And then a vitamin D deficiency. Which of these disorders above would vitamin D deficiency look like? Hypo or hyperparathyroidism? Hypo, because it's not allowing you to do what with calcium? It's not allowing you to absorb calcium. What's the childhood version of vitamin D deficiency? Rickets, yeah. As adults, it's osteomalacia, M-A-L-A-C-I-A. And in childhood, it's rickets. As an adult, it just makes the bones weak, but our bones have actually formed their major structure. But in kids, what's happening? They get bowed legs because all the weight on the top part of their body is putting weight down on the legs, and they're bowing out. And then vitamin D excess. Typically not a lot of symptoms, but it looks like which of the above? Hyper or hypoparathyroidism? Hyper, so back off the ice cream. Okay, the end of that section. Woohoo! Now we get to talk about sex. All right, let me stop that and we'll start sex.